In 1791, in Borg near Kirkcudbright, a remarkable man was born called John MacTaggart. He was largely unschooled or unschoolable, but in 1824 he published an amazing, quirky book which deserves its place as one of the cult classics of Scottish literature. It was called the Scottish Gallovidian Encyclopedia, or to give it its true title, which gives you more of a flavour, the Scottish Gallovidian Encyclopedia, or the original antiquated and natural curiosities of the south of Scotland, containing sketches of eccentric characters and curious places, with explanations of singular words, terms, and phrases, interspersed with poems, tales, anecdotes, etc., and various other strange matters, the whole illustrative of the ways of the peasantry and manners of Caledonia, drawn out and alphabetically arranged by John MacTaggart. It was published in 1824 and withdrawn from publication almost immediately because it scandalised and offended uh, some important people. His own father didn't actually know it was published till he saw it in the bookshop window in Kirkcudbright, where he is reputed to have said, "Your own family, I kent you were an idiot, John. Now the whole world will ken." It's a remarkable book. A couple of years back, the Wigton Book Festival asked me to do a sort of response in my own feeble way to MacTaggart's brilliant work, which is, as I say, a crazy and idiosyncratic book, full of rich Scots language, full of stories, a lot of which I'm sure were absolutely made up. It's out of print now. But anyway, a couple of years ago, the Wigton Book Festival asked me to do a wee response to it. And I wrote this McMillan's Galloway, which has come out in paperback form just recently. And I'll be reading some extracts of this over the next couple of weeks. I followed MacTaggart's directions in looking at the sort of rich, legendary and mythical past of Galloway, as well as looking at some of its more idiosyncratic inhabitants today. One of the things I found was many fairy stories in Dumfries and Galloway. In fact, the fairies were last meant to have left Scotland from Burrowhead near Wigton. And belief in fairies lingered on in Galloway for a long time. Stories about changelings, stories about fairy abduction, and so on. And as late as 1850, in fact, some workmen working on the road between Cretan and Castle Douglas refused to move a tree because of its fairy properties, because it was sacred to the little people. So belief in fairies has lasted for a long time. In this book here, I sort of talk about some of the fairy stories, but I try and bring them up to date in a way. And one of the things I did was interview this bloke who had claimed to be abducted by aliens. And I interviewed him in a pub. I'll read a tiny wee bit about that. It's a sad world without fairies. But are they really gone? Very recently, I was in a public house in the centre of the region. I was meeting and interviewing a man who said he had been abducted by aliens. I like the idea of beings from outer space and really want them to exist, but I'm sceptical about tales of abduction, which can often be excuses for other kinds of behaviour. A wee bit like thinking your badly brought up kids are changelings. My interviewee insisted on anonymity, but told me he'd been taken from his home and returned several days later after various procedures had been made under some form of painless anaesthetic. He seemed to wait for days, he said, but when he was returned home, he found no time had passed at all. If it hadn't been for the painless anaesthetic, it all sounded very much to me like a visit to the dentist, or more likely, the pub. However, the procedures were described in detail, and he seemed quite sincere and nervous in the telling of his story. The aliens, he said, were small and big-eyed. Time, he said, seemed to be suspended. He couldn't tell if they were good or bad. He was returned unharmed. When he left and I was finishing my pint, the barman beckoned me over and said, "He's away with the fairies." Of course he was. Small people, morally ambivalent, time standing still, the echoes are obvious. It's as though, having mastered our geography to such an extent that we can't believe that fairies can share the same physical space as us, we've had to reinvent them in outer space.